Good evening. My name is Leslie Collum, and along with Amy Green, I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Murfreesboro and Rutherford County. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Murfreesboro Communications Department for their co-sponsorship of this event. In particular, I would like to thank the staff of City TV and Alan Bozeman, Communications Director, for making the forum available to the viewing audience. We are pleased to collaborate with Mary Evans from Middle Tennessee State University American Democracy Project in the preparation of this forum. The American Democracy Project's goal is to produce graduates who understand and are committed to engaging in meaningful actions as citizens in a democracy. By working with students and faculty, the American Democracy Project seeks to nurture programs inside and outside the classroom that raise the levels of our campus community's engagement with the local, national, and global communities around us. Our moderators, Rebecca Connard and Laura Clark, are part of this project at MTSU. The League of Women Voters wants you to understand the power of your vote. The leaders you elect make the decisions that affect you, your community, and more. So please, vote on Election Day, November 6th, or participate in early voting, and make your vote count.
Good evening. I am Laura Clark, and I will serve as moderator for the forum this evening. The forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, and the Murfreesboro Communications Department. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this forum. Tonight, we will hear remarks from the Tennessee House District 34 candidates. Before introducing the candidates, I would like to outline the procedure for this forum. Each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes to make an opening statement. When both candidates have completed their opening statement, the first of several questions will be asked. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question. In addition to answering the last question, the candidate may also make closing remarks if they wish. I will begin by introducing the candidates. To my right is Luke Dickerson.
Good evening.
And to my left is Rick Womack.
Good evening, Laura.
They are each seeking election to a seat that is important to the citizens of Rutherford County, and we hope to hear them address the substantive issues facing all of us. I want to thank them for their gracious acceptance of our invitation to participate in this event. Speaking first tonight is Mr. Dickerson. Mr. Dickerson?
Hi, I'm Luke Dickerson, and I grew up here in Murfreesboro. I was originally born in Japan, but my family moved here to work with the Japanese community in Nissan, and also at the Bill Rice Ranch here locally in the 34th District. So I know the area quite well. I graduated from Oakland High School with honors, and I was a national finalist in international business among thousands in the nation. I went on to go to MTSU to graduate with a degree in international relations with a concentration in German. And while I was an undergraduate student, I was a youth minister at Eagleville Baptist Church, and I had developed an interest there of teaching and giving back to the community. I also volunteered as an ESL tutor in college, and a lot of my former students have been very successful. They've gone on to work for many prestigious businesses such as Microsoft, Nissan, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Seeing the importance of education, I decided to go back and get my master's degree at MTSU in curriculum and instruction in 2008. I was very successful in doing this. Also graduated with honors at the top of my class, and tutored in ESL at the same time. My first year teaching, I taught with Bedford County Schools while getting my ESL endorsement at David Lipscomb, where I had a 4.0. And after the first year, I moved on to Northfield Elementary, where I've been a very successful teacher. Most of my students have 2 years of growth for every year that I have them. In the summer of 2011, Governor Haslam even came to visit my school because my scores were so successful. I also run after-school science program, which has recently been cut due to lack of funding at MTSU. I've presented numerous times, and I just want to make sure that our kids here locally have the resources that they need to be successful.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now, Mr. Womack.
Well, thank you, Laura, tonight for moderating this debate. And I also would like to say thank you to the League of Women Voters, the American Democracy Project, and to the Murfreesboro City Cable TV Department for sponsoring and hosting this event. I am Rick Womack, and I'm running for re-election as your state representative in Tennessee's 34th Legislative District. As a young man, I began my career after I graduated from college in 1980. I became a public school teacher where I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle school. It was during that time that I also learned how to fly. I taught for 2 years and then left the teaching profession to become a commercial pilot. From there, I entered the United States Air Force and became an officer and a fighter pilot. I served during the first Gulf War as an F-15 fighter pilot, and after the war was over, I left the active duty Air Force to become a commercial airline pilot, and that is my profession today. I fly the Boeing 777 to multiple destinations around the world, and in 1985, I was blessed with the opportunity and given the most valuable person in my life, which was my wife. We met, we married, and we've been married for over 26 years. And we've been blessed with 4 wonderful children, Joshua, Kayla, Abby, and Jonah. As your state representative, I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the National Rifle Association, and the Tennessee Right to Life. I've also received an A rating from the Tennessee Eagle Forum and the Family Action Council of Tennessee. Tonight, I would like to take this time to ask you for your support and your vote on November 6th. If you'd like to learn more about me, please visit my website at rickwomack34th.com. Again, that's rickwomack34th.com. Thank you.
We will now turn to the first question. And Mr. Womack, you will be the first one to respond. And the question is, describe your background and tell us how it influenced your decision to run for this office and how it will help you serve if elected.
Thank you, Laura. I think the most important thing in politics today is integrity and honesty in politics. As an Air Force officer, that was the center point and the most important character trait. It was integrity, honesty. And that's one reason that I decided to run several years ago, is I'd had enough of dishonesty in politics, of excessive government spending, higher taxes, and our public education system being used as a political football. When I came in as your state representative 2 years ago, we changed that. We've worked together as representatives on both sides of the aisle. We've cut taxes, we've balanced the budget, and we've funded education fully in both fiscal years. And we've brought over 90,000 new jobs to Tennessee. So I think the most important characteristic is integrity. And as an officer, as a public school teacher, and as an airline pilot, leadership and integrity within leadership is a priority. And I feel like I bring that to the Tennessee State Legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And now, Mr. Dickerson, describe your background and tell us how it influenced your decision to run for this office and how it will help you serve if elected.
Well, my background has been as a public school teacher in recent years. So I've been on the front lines of a lot of the education reforms that have taken place in our state. And I've seen how they've affected our kids personally. And one of the reasons why I'm running is because I want to bring awareness to education issues facing our state. I want to do something rather than just complain. And I will work with both sides. I'll work with either party. I want to make sure that the state gives our local schools the resources that they need. Our state spending is more than it ever has been, but our local schools are seeing less funding than they have in previous years. And if you look at like where our state ranks nationally in reading and in math, we're ranked 45th in the country in math and 39th in 4th grade reading. We can do better than that. Only 15% of our high school seniors in Tennessee are college ready. But we know that 54% of all new jobs will require a college degree. We have to do more. We have to make sure that what we're spending is being spent on our kids and not on corporations that are seeing massive profits from education reforms, because we need to be very conservative with our dollars. We need to make sure that what we're spending on is actually going to affect student achievement. And we need to start looking at kids as individuals and making sure that they're learning the skills that they need. It's kid by kid, skill by skill, getting past our differences and spending money on things that are research-based, that have valid research behind them.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now the second question, and Mr. Dickerson, you will answer first. The question is, what do you feel is the #1 issue facing Tennessee in the next 5 years? And how would you address that issue as a member of the Tennessee General Assembly?
In the next 5 years, jobs are going to be key, and making sure that our citizens have the skills that they need to get those jobs and land those jobs. We just saw 800 positions come here locally to Nissan. How many of those positions are going to be filled by Rutherford County's residents? That's going to be a concern for me, and that's where we need to make sure we're putting our resources. By 2018, there's going to be over 100,000 STEM jobs in Tennessee. That's a 15% growth. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. This is where we really need to make our investments, because that's where we're going to make sure that our citizens have the skills that they need to acquire these jobs. Unfortunately, my STEM program has been cut at Northfield. It was funded by MTSU, it was through a grant, and we've lost the funding. And it wasn't just my funding at my school, it was throughout Murfreesboro City Schools. There were several schools, and several schools in the county too. We can't allow this to happen. We need to make sure that we're creating an education system where innovation is key, because innovation creates jobs. And if you look at the number of patents in Tennessee and compare them to other states, patents in Tennessee are actually decreasing. They've decreased the past 10 years. Our state only ranks 38. And as you can tell, we're decreasing. It's gone down. Whereas other states that have really focused on STEM, like Massachusetts and California, their patents have gone up. And we're going to be able to create jobs if we have patents. And that's where we're going to really increase our economy and increase our jobs and quality of life here in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now, Mr. Womack, what do you feel is the #1 issue facing Tennessee in the next 5 years? And how would you address it as a member of the Tennessee General Assembly?
Well, our #1 issue is going to be jobs in Tennessee. It has been that for the last 2 years. As Republicans, for the first time since Reconstruction, we took control of the House of Representatives. We have kept our word. We said we would reduce the size of government, and we have not increased the size of government over the last 2 years. Matter of fact, we've reduced it by $3.5 billion over a 2-year period. That's 10%. And we've been able to fully fund education, public education, during those 2 fiscal years. We've also brought in $145 million for a brand new science building at MTSU. But more importantly, not only did we balance the budget every year, we eliminated the gift tax, we eliminated the inheritance tax over 5 years, and we reduced the sales tax on groceries, with the goal to eliminate completely the sales tax on groceries in subsequent years. Governor Haslam has done a fantastic job. One of the key pieces of legislation we passed 2 years ago was tort reform, the Tennessee Civil Justice Act of 2011. It has made Tennessee one of the premier states in which to do business. We have seen over 90,000 new jobs come to Tennessee over the last 2 years, of which 4,500 have come right here to Rutherford County. When I took office 2 years ago, in 2012, our unemployment rate was 10.6% and climbing, thousands of jobs being lost per month across Tennessee. Today, we are at 8% and decreasing. The policies of the conservative Republican leadership in both the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion are bringing quality jobs and jobs to Tennessee. That is the most important and pressing issue is putting our Tennessee folks back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. You've each spoken of issues in the immediate future in the next 5 years, but let's look ahead farther than that. Mr. Womack, what is your vision for Tennessee in the next 10 to 20 years?
Thank you, Laura. My vision is to continue on the track that we are continuing on right now. Lower taxes, smaller government, less regulations on our businesses, and a multitude of jobs in Tennessee. Putting Tennesseans back to work, that's my #1 priority. My second priority is public education. Not only to make sure it is funded every year, but to reform education. And my friend did mention that Tennessee was 45th and 39th of the 50 states when it comes to math and English. That is correct. But when I took office 2 years ago, Tennessee was 47th and 44th. So we are improving. And as a matter of fact, this past year was the first year in a decade that we've seen test scores increase. And that's been due primarily to legislation that the Republican-controlled House and Senate have passed when it comes to tenure, also budget reforms. But as we go further down into the 21st century here in Tennessee, one personal goal I have is to see alternative forms of energy, particularly with propane and compressed natural gas. By converting vehicles, particularly fleet vehicles and buses, to propane, we can see not only energy costs coming down in Tennessee, but across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And now, Mr. Dickerson, what is your vision for Tennessee in the next 10 to 20 years?
In the next 10 to 20 years, I'd like to see Tennessee to continue to be a good place for jobs to come, a good place for automotive industry to thrive in this area. I think that's what's made Middle Tennessee a great place to live, where we've seen companies like Nissan come in and bring good quality jobs. I would like to see Tennessee have the #1 education system here in the Southeast. I think we can do it if we're listening to effective teachers and effective administrators, and we're making sure that we're spending the money on the kids. One of the reasons why I ran is because I have seen an increase in government in my classroom. 2 years ago, I wasn't testing my students 4.5 months out of the school year. I don't have the time that I need to teach anymore. I want to make sure that we streamline our testing so that teachers have the time to teach, and that we have the resources that we need, and that our students are seeing the innovation that they need, and that we're using inquiry-based teaching methods, because that's going to affect how our students think, how our students perceive problems, and how they are successful in life and how they adapt. I think Tennessee can be #1 in education. And I also want to have a push with roads and construction. Right now we have the infrastructure that we need, but as we continue to grow as a state, that's going to be a serious concern and major problem, how we're funding our roads. And I'm committed to looking at alternative fuel sources, like Mr. Womack said, and alternative ways to funding our roads and interstates and infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. Each of you have experience in public education in the state of Tennessee, but I'd like to get a little more specific. And so the question is, what, in your opinion, are the greatest challenges facing public education in Tennessee? Please consider K-12 and higher education in your response, and be as specific as possible. Mr. Dickerson?
I really see it as an issue of funding and time for our teachers to teach their kids, and making sure that they have the money and the flexibility to spend that money here locally. I think we need to see an increase in our local schools' autonomy and being able to spend the money where they need it. And we know where we need to spend our money. Unfortunately, if you look at where our funding is going in the state, it's going to corporations like K-12 Inc. They've gotten a lot of contracts with testing, and they're connected to the teacher evaluation model. This was funded, or this company was founded by a convicted felon, Michael Milken, who was convicted in the the early 90s under the Bush administration. And after he left prison, he decided to get into government contracting. His corporation has made over $500 million this year alone, and they've gotten contracts. They've opened up an online charter school here in Tennessee that was in the bottom 11% of all Tennessee schools. And from the funding aspect, the online charter school has taken away some of our local funding by having an abnormal increase in students because they're able to take students from all over Tennessee and attract them. And also, we've seen funding decrease for higher ed. I think we as a state need to invest more in our higher ed institutions. In the past 10 years, we've seen funding about 30% decrease for our state institutions. If we're going to see those patents that are going to create jobs, we've got to be investing in innovation and technology.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now, Mr. Womack, in your opinion, what are the greatest challenges facing public education in Tennessee? Please consider K-12 and higher education in your response and be as specific as possible.
The most important thing we need to remember as Tennesseans is that state government, though it gives guidelines and directives for the public education system, and it funds over half the public education system, the burden of controlling the local education system belongs to the local education association, in this case, Rutherford County, Murfreesboro City Schools. The state provides the money, and as I said, we have provided and fully funded the education budget over the last 2 years. My opponent says that there's some problems with the team, as well as some funding for the local education associations. Again, that falls upon the local LEAs. And one thing he and I do agree on, there is the new teacher evaluation model called TEAM, Teacher Evaluation Acceleration Model. It does fall short, and it was half created by a convicted felon, Mr. Milken. I myself don't agree with it. There's a much better model called the TIGER model, and the TIGER stands for Teacher Instructional Growth and Effectiveness and Results. It was created by teachers and school systems across Tennessee. But it is the choice of the local school districts, Rutherford County, whether they want to implement the TIGER or the TEAM. So that burden falls upon our local school districts. When it comes to state representative and what can we do at the state level, again, we can encourage our local school districts, but they maintain the sole control. We also have to work with the federal government, providing, they provide funding, and certain rules and regulations have to be met by the Tennessee Department of Education. So working with the federal government as well as state government, I know our local school districts will do the job that's necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And now, turning our attention to another topic, you've each tonight expressed concern for economic issues in Tennessee. Considering our country's economic situation, how do you evaluate how well the economy of Tennessee is doing? Mr. Womack?
Well, as I said earlier, 2 years ago when I took office as your state representative in the 34th District, we saw unemployment at 10.6% and thousands of jobs being lost every month. You chose to elect a conservative leadership of Republicans, not only in the House, but also in the governor's mansion and in the Senate. We've lived up and we've kept our word. We've made government smaller. We've cut taxes. We've reduced regulations on small businesses. We've reformed workers' compensation. And we have been focused, and the governor has been focused on bringing new businesses to Tennessee. As a matter of fact, Governor Haslam has been so successful, he was just about 2 weeks ago, awarded by our Area Development Magazine the 2012 Gold Shovel Award. And that award is given to one state that has achieved the greatest success in terms of job creation and economic growth. We are on the right track in Tennessee, not only to create jobs, but improve our economy. We're also seeing an increase in revenues. Those revenues not only go into education, but also to infrastructure. As we grow here in Rutherford County and across Tennessee, new roads, new bridges are being built. We've also placed an emphasis on law enforcement. We want to make sure our communities are safer. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee, we passed multiple pieces of legislation that have enhanced law enforcement's ability to control gang violence and drugs, synthetic drugs, as well as human trafficking and prostitution. So in Tennessee, I and my colleagues are focused on the welfare of our citizens, not only in the 34th District, but across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And Mr. Dickerson, considering our country's economic situation, how do you evaluate how well the economy of Tennessee is doing?
I think we've fared fairly well considering what's happening in our country. And I think it's because we've made investments that have been different from other states. We've had a different infrastructure. Yes, unemployment's down, but our families are still struggling. I think we can do more. I do think we need to focus on lowering the sales tax on food for our families. I think that's vital because everyday working families are still struggling. Yes, unemployment numbers are down, but families aren't seeing the incomes that they did 3-4 years ago. We can do more as a state. We have a lot of innovative people here. We just need to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need to start business, that we have the infrastructure that we need. I think we're making wise investments. I think we need to continue to make investments, and we need to be open and responsive to business leaders here in our community. And we do need to look at regulations that are affecting our county, and that's why it's important to go to events that the Chamber of Commerce holds, be open to listening to business leaders in our community, making sure that Nissan has the resources that they need, making sure that we're working with businesses and schools to form partnerships so that our students have the skills that they need to land those jobs, those high-paying jobs, to start families, and they're able to support the community and find jobs and buy houses. We're seeing fewer foreclosures than we have in recent years. That's a positive. Our economy is on the right track. We just need to keep the path.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now a question that will give us some insight into your decision-making approach. And the question is this. In your role as a legislator in Tennessee, please consider both the short and long term and tell us how you would make legislative decisions in order to match services with available revenues. Mr. Dickerson, would you respond first?
Okay. First, I'm going to look at our priorities, and as an educator and somebody that's passionate about education, I'm going to be looking at our education budget. I'm going to be looking at where our money is being spent. As we adopt the Common Core standards, it's going to take an expenditure, state expenditure of about $285 million. Where's that money going to come from? We do have an increase of revenue. We do have around $500 million in excess that's in reserve. I do think we need to hold on to a little bit of money to reserve. So education is going to be key, making sure that we're spending that $285 million well, and that it's giving teachers the resources, not going towards testing and more evaluation. Also, we're going to have to be looking at medical and what to do about the Affordable Health Care Act. It's going to possibly cost the state $300 million in 3 years. We're going to have to look at that. We're going to have to make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need. Right now, I'm very concerned about the number of primary care doctors that we have here in Tennessee. Do we have the infrastructure that we need? And also, should we let the federal government run the exchange instead of Tennessee? At this point, I want to make sure that we have funding for education, so I'm going to do whatever is necessary to make sure that that's priority.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And now, Mr. Womack, Considering both the short term and the long term, tell us how you think legislative decisions should be made to match services with available revenues.
Well, the first and foremost that comes up in my mind when it comes to making decisions on any piece of legislation that I'm asked to vote on is the Constitution. Our state Constitution is first. The U.S. Constitution also plays a factor, of which I've taken an oath to both. If it doesn't meet the constitutional test, I won't vote for it. Secondly, does it meet the test for reduced government? Does it make government bigger? If it does, then I'm not going to vote for it. We can do things more efficiently, and we've proven that. We've balanced the budget, we've cut state spending by over 10% in 2 years, and we've still fully funded the most important services that are necessary: education, law enforcement, health care. These things are very important, but if we don't have the jobs and the revenue coming in, education, everything else means nothing. We'll not be able to fund it. So for me, those are the two most important things that I will look at and will continue to look at in the short term as well as the long term. There are many good ideas that come across my desk up there, and a lot of them from my fellow colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But again, for me personally, they have to meet these two tests: smaller government, lower taxes, less regulations on our businesses, and getting government off the backs of our Tennesseans and our fellow citizens, and let them run this state, run their lives, and run their public education system.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And now another question to look again at how you make decisions. In your position as a member of the General Assembly, you will have goals that you set for yourself, and then you will have to prioritize the goals. How do you determine priorities when achieving all goals is not possible? What drives you in setting priorities? Mr. Womack?
Well, it's really no different than each one of you who have to run a household budget. You look at certain things, you write them down. You've got to have a house. You've got to have transportation to go back and forth to work. You've got to have food. Hopefully health insurance is included in that. These are the things you have to have, and it's no different in state government. We've sat down and we've looked at the things we have to have in state government. We have to have safe communities, law enforcement. We have to make sure we fund that, emergency services, public education. These are the priorities. As we sit down and look at each one of those, we must ask ourselves, one, do we have the money? Two, do we need to raise the money if it's not there and make government bigger? If not, then we go with a smaller government and make sure those essential services are funded. And once those essential services are funded, we have money left over. And what we're doing right now is putting extra money in our rainy day fund. Matter of fact, last year we put in $72 million to bring the rainy day fund back up to over $350 million with a goal of $500 million. So you've got a savings account to fall back on, even in state government. These are the priorities. It's no different than running a household budget. Just make it simpler by looking at it at the big picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And now, Mr. Dickerson, how do you determine priorities when achieving all goals is not possible? What drives you in setting those priorities?
Well, we all have to set priorities in life, and Rick's right. We do have to set budgets, and we do have to look at what's important. And our number one top priority is making sure that our state citizens are safe, and that will be my priority first, because we have to make sure that we can survive and maintain our way of life. The second priority will be fully funding education, and kids will always be first for me. Making sure that our kids are safe, making sure that our kids are learning. The second priority will be transportation, making sure that we have the roads and infrastructure that we need, because we're not going to be bringing jobs here to Tennessee if we don't have the roads and infrastructure that we need. I think that that's probably one of the biggest issues that our state's going to face in the upcoming years is how are we going to fund our roads and our infrastructure, because we're going to be seeing an increase in population, an increase in business. Where's that infrastructure going to come from? So that it will be a key point in my decision making. I think we have to look at how do the decisions that we make affect our citizens back home? How do they affect people in the 34th District? How are the decisions that we're making up at the state capitol affecting our local governments? Are they increasing our property taxes? Are they increasing the burden on local government? I really think we need to look at the decisions we make as a state and how they are affecting the people back home. And that'll be priority, looking at families, making sure that families are having the quality of life that has made Tennessee such a great place to live.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. Media touches all of our lives in a number of different ways. It plays multiple roles in our lives. What role should the media play in informing citizens of issues? How will you engage with the media in keeping your constituents informed? Mr. Dickerson?
Well, you're right. The media is there to keep the people informed, and the media should have access to their representatives. And I think it's key in letting people know how you're making the decisions up at the Hill and why you're making those decisions. Without a relationship with the media, those things don't happen. And it's important that we also look at various types of media with changes in technology, making sure that you have access to Facebook. People can go to my Facebook account, Luke E. Dickerson for State Rep, and they can check out my issues. And just being there when the Tennessean wants to interview you, our News Channel 5. And the media is there to make sure that the elected officials are doing what they need to do, making sure that ghost voting is not happening at our state hill, making sure that we're addressing the issues that affect our citizens and that we're not impeding on their daily lives. Media plays a vital role. People read the paper every day. We need to make sure that we as legislators are also reading the papers and watching the news so that we know what's going on in our community, because that helps us to craft legislation that our community needs back home.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. Mr. Womack, what role should the media play in informing citizens of issues, and how will you engage with the media in keeping your constituents informed?
I think the media has an important role to play in helping us get the message out about what is going on in your state government as well as local. However, Laura, I kind of disagree with the premise of your question regarding the media being the central catalyst in getting the message out. That message needs to come from each one of us as individuals. We need to be in direct contact with our constituents. This is one reason I know some folks want to make the 2-year term a 4-year term for state representatives, and I'm adamantly opposed to that. Every 2 years, it forces us to get out and meet the folks, to knock on the doors, to stay in touch with the local citizens of the 34th District. And that's the beautiful thing about our government and the way it's set up here in Tennessee. I've met hundreds and hundreds of new folks across the district just over the last 2 months. They've let me know where they stand and what they believe in. I'm the one responsible for the pulse of those folks that I represent. I don't rely on the media. The media is very helpful sometimes, like I said, in facilitating the message and overseeing the proceedings of government. But it's up to us, the individual legislators, to stay in touch, not only during election time, but also when we're serving up on the Capitol Hill. Again, this is the most important thing that we can do as legislators. And I don't rely on the media, and I will never do that. I want to be fully accessible to the citizens of the 34th District.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And the next question. In very concise terms, what do you feel are the 3 main responsibilities of a representative in the Tennessee General Assembly? Mr. Womack?
3 main responsibilities. First, integrity and honesty in government, not taking issues, people's lives, education, their money, their jobs, and playing political football with them. That's the first and foremost. The second, for me, is to uphold the Constitution as it is written, literally word for word. And third, to represent the values, the beliefs, the morals, suggestions, and ideas of my constituents in the 34th District here in Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. And Mr. Dickerson, in concise terms, what do you feel are the 3 main responsibilities of a representative in the Tennessee General Assembly?
I do think the number 1 responsibility is to make sure that we're upholding our state constitution and our federal constitution, and that the laws that we pass are in line with our U.S. Constitution and our state constitution. I'm very proud of those 2 pieces of that have made our country such a great place to live in. We need to make sure that we're respecting the diversity in our community, and because that's what the Constitution's about. We're respecting everyone's right to free speech, to freedom of religion, and we're respecting our rights to even to bear arms, and that we're not allowing government to get in the way. We're not dictating our opinions or our religious beliefs on others, even though my religious beliefs are very important, and I do believe that this country was founded on Christian principles. I think we have to respect diversity. I think that's number 1. And also we need to think about how the legislation that's coming before us is going to affect the constituents back home. How is it going to affect their pocketbooks? How's it going to affect their daily lives? Is it going to intrude? Is it going to cause harm to our community? Is it going to cause divisiveness? Those are things that we need to shy away from, and we need to focus on the issues that our constituents are coming to us and talking to us about. And we need to be responsive to our constituents when they reach out to us. And I agree with Rick. They do need to be the number 1 source of information. But also, I realize that this is a really tough job. And we need to make sure that we're getting our information from various sources. And then the last piece, I think it's important that we do uphold our ethics, that we're making sure that we're honest and moral in our decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. This question has to do with one of our missions in League of Women Voters. And so I'm going to ask you, candidates, what would you say to your constituents to encourage them to get out to vote? And in this response, please include your closing remarks. And Mr. Dickerson, if you'll answer first.
Okay. I would like to thank the Women League of Voters for hosting this event tonight. I think it lets the constituents know about how we're going to address the issues that our community is facing. And I would like to thank the listeners tonight for listening and being an informed voter. Please go out and make sure that your voice is heard. Know that I'll always be open to listening to your needs and suggestions as a state representative. Know that I'll go across the aisle. I'll work with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that our community has the resources that they need, making sure that Tennessee remains one of the best places to live. 2 years ago, we heard a promise of always being vigilant, and we heard a promise of working towards smaller government. I think we've heard a lot of that tonight. I don't know if my opponent has the discernment to make those tough decisions and to ask those tough questions and to represent the needs of the 34th. He's voted along party lines quite a lot. I haven't seen a lot of party crossover. And even at a time when it was in his own family's best interest, in his own son's best interest, He voted along party lines. He didn't ask those tough questions about online virtual charter schools that have had a devastating effect on our kids. We need to make sure that we're asking those hard questions. And I don't see smaller government with 4,000 bills being passed, over 4,000 bills being passed in the past 2 years. It's not just about the money, it's also about regulation. And I do think we need to have smaller, smarter government, and I'll stand for that.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. And Mr. Womack, in your closing remarks, would you tell us, what would you say to your constituents to encourage them to get out to vote? And please make your closing remarks with that.
Thank you, Laura. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime, and you've heard that time and time again, not only here at the local level and the state level, but at the federal level. Tonight I come before you with good news. I have discernment, and we have made a difference. The Republicans and the conservatives in the Tennessee House have kept their word, and we've made a difference. You've seen us, when the national level hasn't been able to, you've seen us bring jobs to Tennessee. Unemployment, like I said earlier, down from 10.6 to 8% and decreasing. Over 90,000 new jobs, of which 4,500 have come just here to Rutherford County, and more are coming in each month. We've eliminated the inheritance tax. We've eliminated the gift tax, and we've reduced the sales tax on groceries, and we've done all this by reducing the size of government and eliminating excessive waste and fraud. And we've also fully funded the education budget in both fiscal years. We've strengthened law enforcement's ability to fight crime with multiple pieces of legislation. And we've passed a landmark piece of legislation when it called tort reform. And as I said earlier, it's made Tennessee one of the premier places in the country to do business. We've also passed legislation that has addressed our illegal immigration problem. Legislation that takes Tennesseans and puts them in those vacant Tennessee jobs. When it comes to voting along party lines, as I said earlier, I vote my conservative values and what my constituents have asked me to vote and represent when it comes to their beliefs and their values. Of the 4,000 bills that we passed over the last 2 years, this is true. But over 25% of those pieces of legislation came about and eliminated old laws that were not necessary. So we've actually reduced the size of government and the size of the laws on the books. Again, thank you for your time, and God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. Once again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, Cable Commission, and City Communications Department, I want to thank both of the candidates, Mr. Luke Dickerson, Mr. Rick Womack, for their participation tonight. I also want to recognize the staff of Communications Department for their cooperation in presenting this program. And also, I want to remind all citizens to go to the polls to exercise this important right to determine who represents you, as well as voting in the other important positions being on the ballot. Early voting began October 17th and runs until November 1st. Election Day is November 6th. Please go vote. And now may we close with a round of applause for the candidates.
Thank you.